All right, welcome everybody to session 14 of Classic Metal Class. This time, Scott and I wanted to tackle something that we've been talking about and kicking around for a long time. And I titled it MetaMetal Thematics. I almost said fanatics, but so meta, anytime that you've got that, it means that there's like a higher level or it's applying to itself. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at songs that talk about or articulate or reference the heavy metal, whatever we want to call it, lifestyle, ethos, idea. And I'm bringing in a little bit of scholarship on this. I don't know if you can see it. Here, we got to get it. It's hard to get on the Zoom thing. It's Heavy Metal, a Cultural Sociology by Dina Weinstein, a early and still pretty good resource on the sociology of heavy metal. I really like her stuff, and someday maybe we'll have her on the show if I can. She's down in Chicago, so maybe I can, get in touch with her. And she says a couple things that are, they jibe with our experience, I think, of those who were around in the 80s in particular, but also, going back into the 70s and then going forward into the 90s and 2000s. And she has some really interesting things to say. Some of what she has to say is a bit dated, so it doesn't maybe apply to the contemporary metal scene. For example, that heavy metal is tied in with a youth ethos. I think some genres are, but obviously, when many of us metalheads are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe not so much, youth
the lifestyle
anymore.
part.
Exactly. Yeah. And well, and we're not partying every day, like maybe some of us did back then either. But so metal thematics and metal identity. This is something we've been thinking about for a long time. And they're, metal songs, by virtue of what's going on with the instrumental parts, are already metal. So it's not as if there's a metal thematic in the instrumental side. It's on the lyric side. So a song that, has heavy metal in the title, or like, Saxon's Denim and Leather is talking about a lifestyle and a community, which we're going to look at in a bit. And it's not the only genre. And I was hoping Scott could help me out with this, where there's a meta thematic. And I thought, okay, there's blues songs about the blues. There's all these blues songs where it's the something blues, right? And there's a lot of lyrical content where they're talking about having the blues or what the blues is about. There's a lot of rock songs about rock, and there's some overlap with metal songs about metal, since metal is a genre of rock. And there's a lot of rapping about rap in rap. What other, are there jazz songs about jazz lyrically, or are there other genres that you can think about? Like,
well, if you go back to it, don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
Most jazz standards were radio hits in the 30s and 40s. So the jazz musicians, the real early ones, especially when we got to Charlie Parker and got to bebop, they were just playing, basically improvising over songs everybody knew on the radio. Now we're so far behind. We're so far ahead of that none of us remember those songs being on the radio. Like,
of course, yeah.
But back then, I'm trying to think. Well, Take Five, I think people are familiar with. It's kind of a play on words, right? Because it's the songs in that time signature.
Yeah.
Lyrical jazz. No, they may have been talking about the era. Like we saw what Frank Sinatra, the songs that he made famous.
Yeah.
They had to do with whatever it had to do with that time about, I guess the content's not, I guess rarely it would be about, the style or the feel.
Now that I think about it though, like punk, there are punk songs that reference punk, right? And
well, that's a good one, of course. Yeah.
And are there pop songs that Duran, pop trash, right? So there are some pop songs, although they're doing it in kind of an ironic way.
That's a great album, by the way. Yeah. I like that one a lot.
I'm actually, people don't know this that much about me, but I'm a massive Duran fan since childhood. And people, they're, how can you like Duran and metal? Well, different things for different times, and
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
they're one of the greats.
yeah, and I think that kind of reaches different parts of yourself, maybe.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. No, like rock and roll bands. Well, we're an American band.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
So, but I don't think the lyrics, I think with metal, I think the lyrics are about a certain lifestyle. You know, and they're pretty consistent. Like, you know, if they're singing, if you have 10 different bands singing about the same topic, like partying or having sex or whatever, I mean, they may be using different words, but the themes are pretty cohesive from, you know, from band to band.
I think it depends somewhat on what we could call subgenre, and I don't mean like getting into like, say, black metal versus sludge metal versus that. I'm talking about stuff that was a little bit less clearly defined back in the 80s. You know, Donna Weinstein, for example, talks about there being basically three main genres on a spectrum, with thrash speed on one side, light, as she LITE she calls it, on the other, that would include like, you know, Cinderella or Poison, and then heavy metal, classic heavy metal in the middle, and bands like Rat kind of straddling the two, you know, except maybe being over like closer to the speed metal side, and bands being able to transition. So like Judas Priest shifts, you know, at a certain point to become more like the speed metal, thrash metal, in you know, like on Painkiller.
Oh
but you're
yeah.
right. There are, so if you take a theme like partying, the way that Rat sings about partying will have a lot in common with the way Van Halen talks about partying, and Wasp talks about partying, and you know, but once we start getting into like maybe Dio, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, partying, if it's being talked about, becomes something maybe a bit darker. You know?
Yeah, well, Dio's a good example. I mean, he does do the rock anthems like We Rock.
Yeah.
But I don't think he didn't. I mean, that's why he left Richie Blackmore when Rainbow was going pop. He's, you know, he kept saying, you know, I didn't want to sing love songs. I
Well,
didn't want to.
when you party in a Dio song, sooner or later, somebody gets in trouble. You know, that's, it's not hey, let's have a party, it's all fun, let's drink
Right.
some booze, you know, till up comes the sun, or whatever other rhyme we want to put together. It's
Right.
more like, well, if you open up that door, what's behind it?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought up something really important. There are certain key themes to heavy metal, and we sat down a couple days ago, me and Scott, and came up with a list that we thought captured a lot of these, and perhaps, you know, people can help us further refine and define this. So there is the partying thing, right? Hedonism in general, what Weinstein calls the Dionysiac element of it. You know, so think about Kiss and Van Halen and bands like that, drugs, drinking, having sex, you know, meaningless sex, but it's a lot of fun. But then there's also a different side to the sexuality where it can be kind of romantic, you know, desire, eros, love, you know, one-on-one kind of thing, which is often tied in with a, oh, I lost her, you know. As a matter of fact, Witchfinder General has, I loved her and I lost her. There's songs about Accept's losing more than you ever had is another song like that. Accept has some pretty romantic stuff, you know.
And Udo's just a romantic. He just looks like such a romantic guy.
A roly-poly romantic Tank, you know. Tank actually has that song "Wasting My Life Away" off of the Honor album, and it's about a guy who's, you know, he's in a bad relationship, and he's wondering, you know, how can she hurt me this much? And you know, it's 2 a.m, and I've got tears in my eyes, and then the next verse, it's 4 a.m, and I've got tears in my eyes. You know? So there's a lot of that. It's not just let's get it laid as much as possible. And then,
on that subject, on that subject too, before I forget,
yeah,
that as well, some bands talked about the dangers of it, like Dawkins' Kiss of Death, I think is
Oh
about
yeah.
sleeping around and catching AIDS, I think, right? Is that the Kiss of Death?
That could be.
She
Well,
promised
yeah.
paradise, like he hired a hooker and he got, you know, I don't think they explicitly said that, but they're dancing around the fact that
I mean, it could be
casual,
syphilis too, right?
yeah. So once in a while they would write the dangers of it. Like I said before, like Ozzy would write Suicide Solution.
Yeah.
And remember that went to court. The family
Because it was
sued
misinterpreted, right? Yeah.
by the kid that
As
drank.
did Beyond the Realms of Death, Judas Priest's song, which is not about partying so much, but it's about a sad case as well, you know, a kid who becomes inaccessible, you could say. I want to come back to Mark's question in a minute, but let's talk about some of these other things as well. There's also the fantasy aspect, you know, dealing with magic and the occult. And I actually put down rainbows because Ronnie James Dio, I don't think, can write an album that doesn't have a rainbow in it somewhere. And that's an important aspect as well. And sometimes it extends to knights and, you know, fighting and stuff like that. And then there's you can say that there's distinguishable from that not necessarily Satanist in the sense of like endorsing, worshiping Satan, but rather, a concern that's horror oriented. You think about Black Sabbath's early stuff. They're not actually saying, hey, it's so wonderful to worship the devil. They're saying, oh, this is really terrible. We might get caught in this kind of thing. Now, by the time that you get to like Venom, I would say there's an interesting endorsement, but you know, Venom also has a entire album called At War with Satan, where they're like, screw God, but also screw the devil, you know? And that's an important part. And then there's the aggression, toughness, rebellion, criminality, fighting kind of aspect to it as well. You know, Running Free is a perfect example of that.
Breaking the Law.
Oh, that's another good example. Yeah. And then being misunderstood and alone. Very common. It can be whiny, you know, like Ozzy's stuff. Ozzy for a while could not do an album without complaining about being misunderstood, you know.
Right.
Or it could be, well, you know, breaking the law is an example of that, right? Why am I breaking the law? Because I'm stuck on my own and, you know, I go from town to town and nobody loves me. And then another thing that I think is there from the very beginning in Black Sabbath, in Blue Oyster Cult, in some of these other bands is reacting against a world that has gone mad, you know, a world that is unfair, oriented towards, war or aggression or exploitation, and sort of like saying, I'm not going to buy into this, man. And that's something that metal has in common with punk, right?
Yeah, the themes, that's a good point, because well, punk is kind of a badge of honor, being rebellious, right?
Yeah.
Because like people, because who is the punk artist that recently it came out that he voted for Trump, and instead of all the punks getting mad at him for voting for Trump, they said that's the most punk thing you can do.
I suppose, yeah, in a way, not just a badge of honor, but almost like a requirement. You could be ostracized from the community if you were considered to be a poser or conformist or something like that.
Or if you get famous.
There's an interesting tension there, because how do you maintain that? But another key theme, and the one that we're going to focus on a lot, and then we'll come back to Mark's question about partying, playing and losing yourself in the music itself and the fan band connection. There's this interesting passage in Donna Weinstein's Heavy Metal Sociology that says the social dimension of heavy metal is a transaction between the artists, audiences, and mediators that enable the genre to exist. A transaction is a set of exchanges between participants. Each participant does something distinctive to contribute to the transaction and receives something in turn from the other participants. And I think she's completely right about this, you know. This is an important dimension. And so these MetaMetal songs helped us to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a metalhead? What does it mean to be involved in this? And it's not as if there was like a neat cut and dried answer to it. It was like a whole range of questions and answers. So let's take some of these questions before we move on to the identity thing. Mark says, would you say there's a difference between the way metal bands sing about partying and how partying is sung about in other genres? Good question. I mean, insofar as metal overlaps with other kinds of hard rock, I would say there's a similarity there, right? And
Right.
as metal becomes more extreme in the late 80s, early 90s, I think there's modes of partying which reflect that, and that would, like, you wouldn't find you could find soft metal bands talking ironically about S&M practices, right? But you don't get the idea that they really are into it or know that much about it. But if Venom starts singing about it, they're probably talking from experience. What do you think, Scott?
It's a great question. So first of all, take a rock band like Poison.
Yeah.
I would say they sing about excessive partying, but if you take different genres, the difference between it, like if you took, say, a singer-songwriter, like a pop singer-songwriter, it's not done to excess. There might be a line in it like, we had one too many drinks last night, or but
we found ourselves in bed or something like that.
Yeah, right. Or they'll be talking about maybe a hangover, but I think the difference with metal is it's almost hyperbolic. I mean, it's like, it's such an extreme that, like, revisiting these lyrics is like, who would survive that? Yes. And so I think in other styles of music, I mean, with jazz standards, if some of the old ones, it's always classy. It's always sipping on a martini or something. It's like,
blues
not
isn't though.
What's that?
I mean, blues isn't though. Blues is pretty raunchy.
Well, blues, yeah, and country too.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
it was about, there's got to be a line about Jack Daniels, being your best friend because your girl left you. But again, that's more the person in those songs is drinking for a different reason. In rock, we're gonna have a great time. We're gonna party, and which is
a great example of that. Everybody's working for the weekend. Right.
Oh God,
think about the culture that represents. So that's the Loverboy song.
Yeah.
And it's, the work week, we're all doing whatever we're doing, maybe working in an office, maybe, working on our cars or stuff like that. And that sucks. But the weekend comes and now everybody's having a great time.
And that would fit under kind of an anthematic sort of.
Yeah, that is definitely an anthem. I actually texted that to Andy, my wife, when we were in the middle of, a rather tough week, and I just texted her the video for that, and she thought it was kind of a nice pick me up. Now, Carl has a really great question here, a very deep question. What is it about not just metal but rock and roll in general that tends to lead people to hang their identity on it? I've always found this an interesting phenomenon. People may have been into blues or jazz back in the 20s or 30s and been heavy jazz or blues enthusiasts, but somewhere along the line, when rock and roll was born, the idea of this is a lifestyle to which I can subscribe really took hold. I'm thinking about the greasers of the 50s, later the ideas of mods and rockers and primarily in England, but with imitators in other places, the biker culture, later heavy metal and punk rock identity. Why do you feel we as a culture descended into what arguably could be termed as an identity crisis to which these identities presented themselves as a solution? So there's a lot of moving parts here. You want to take a stab at it first, Scott?
Sure. I've always said this. When I was in high school, there were the outcast kids that didn't really have a lot of friends or maybe social skills. And they were all diehard metal fans. And I think a lot of the content about being a rebel, or it's kind of like metal lyrics create a complete fantasy world to go into, but also there's something about, other people weren't listening to heavy metal in my school. I was, some outcasts. I didn't really have a lot of friends in high school, actually. So, but when you went home and put on the headphones and put on Maiden, it's kind of like there's something in my mind, and I talk to my friends about it. It's kind of like a place for misunderstood people to go, misunderstood people, they would go there and then they found their people. So we always talk about with the denim jacket with all the patches on the back.
Right.
And, we would go to the mall and walk around or see somebody we didn't know, but with one of those jackets, and we would, wow, man, that Triumph thing, that's a cool one. And it was kind of, I think, Carl's completely right. It became a culture in itself where it's like, well, you understand me as well.
Yeah.
And
so now I have a complementary sort of background experience in this, which is that for me, it wasn't being like totally on my own and listening to metal. It was rather that it was part of a countercultural community that I could then transition into and belong to. And I really liked the music. I liked the heaviness of it. I liked, the guitar solos. I liked singing along to the bass lines and stuff like that. But I, basically from like 8th grade all the way through high school, and then it was similar. There were other people when I was in the Army who were into metal too. And we had a little subculture there. But it was usually like there would be like some older kids, and there'd be like, the Burnouts and other kids who were kind of tough and maybe criminals. Actually, some of them were. And you instead of hanging out with the jocks or the popular kids or whatever other cliques, you'd hang out with these people because they like to do kind of the things that I like to do, which is party and talk about the music and play rough sports and things like that. And sometimes although it didn't happen as often as in music videos, hook up,
right.
And so there'd often be like an older cadre of people who were like initiated in the music. So like you look at some of the songs that we're going to focus on, those were coming out, in the late 70s, early 80s, as we were moving from middle school into high school. And so maybe, like in my case, growing up in rural Wisconsin, I hadn't heard a lot of these bands because they weren't on the radio. There would be older people who would kind of initiate you into, oh, you like that? You should listen to this, man. Somebody would have an older brother who'd have a whole bunch of albums, and you'd sit in their
right.
It was always in the basement. You'd sit in their basement, a room where there was the big stereo, and listen to that. And it was, as Scott was putting out, an identifier, the way you dressed, the way that you talked, the things that you valued. Now, that doesn't quite get to about culture. And I think that Carl is onto something here. The reason why there could be these countercultural subcultures that were identified with music has to do with the rest of the culture not giving people what they wanted. And this, again, is something that Weinstein talks about a lot. In Britain, metal was essentially blue collar. It's not necessarily now, but it definitely was then. You would hear it in what were called working man's clubs, right? That's where a lot of these bands cut their teeth. And these would be, where you could buy beer and maybe some cheap rail drinks, and that was about it. And you could listen to it in clubs here as well. And I think that there's probably different answers for different kinds of metal, and there's probably different answers for different musical genres. Like the punk rock thing sometimes intersected with metal, but sometimes was very antagonistic with metal. I remember the days when metalheads used to say, punk is junk, heavy metal rules, right? And I didn't participate in this, but out in Delafield, just down the road from where I was living, the high schoolers who were heavy metalheads and punk used to get together and beat the crap out of each other, over. It's like they're championing their music. And it also is something that kind of flowed out of their music. You wouldn't catch, soft rock aficionados getting together and rumbling with the metalheads. That's not their sort of deal. Right. So I think it really depends on which subculture we're talking about. I don't know if that's a decent answer, but
well, that brings it kind of lends the question you and I asked. That, did metal make the lifestyle, or did metal attract the lifestyle?
Yeah, and which I think is both. It's a dialectical sort of thing, and it builds off of each other, not quite generationally, because we're talking about something happening within the scope of like 1.5 generations.
Right.
But you can talk about something like maybe semi-generations, like, the metal of the world of 1979, which would include, say, Judas Priest being at the top, Motorhead, the Scorpions, Black Sabbath kind of coming back into things, UFO kind of going down, Van Halen definitely on the front end of things. That's a different generation or sub-generation than, say, metal in 1983, or metal in 1980, what would be the equivalent of that, 4 years, 1987. I think that there's some important transitions that are taking place in the scene, the lifestyle,
And I think also the people that are writing the music, for the most part, the metalheads, I think the reason they attract people is because they're, as it turns out, they were a lot like us, right?
Yeah.
So they're actually writing about this stuff because that's what they're thinking. Although you take a band like Kiss and they sing about stuff that they never do, like drinking, like cold gin, and taking, and just partying. And we know that Paul and Gene don't drink. We know that
although they certainly, were doing a lot of sexual relationships back then before they got,
they were, and they would have the thinly disguised, what do you call where, wink, wink, like,
yeah.
Well, they did. Let's put the X in sex. I mean,
I was just laughing because I was thinking maybe Ace did enough drinking and drugs for the entire band, though.
How is that guy still walking?
Yeah, there's this. What was that? It was a shock jock kind of guy on TV who it was late at night because he swore on TV, and he had Ace Frehley on for one of his shows. This is the guy who later lost his show because he accused fake neo-Nazis of having, like, beaten him up and written a swastika on him.
Was it
Morton Downey?
Yeah, Morton Downey. Yeah,
Ace showed up on that, and it's you watch that and you're like, yeah, this guy is pickled. So let's take Carl's other comment. He says, I remember when the metal folks started going to the punk shows, Metallica's Garage Days EP. All of a sudden, the Misfits were cool, and the metal folks started showing up at Killing Joke shows where you never would have seen that before. I do think the tribal thing we're discussing here is very relevant. Yeah, I think that's quite true, and we do see this even in genres of metal. Debates about, even in Weinstein's analysis, is light metal, pop metal, whatever we want to call it, is it really metal or not? Or should we push that off into a different genre?
And that's a tough one because we'll take Whitesnake. She would probably consider Whitesnake.
Oh, yeah.
But we're talking about somebody that was in one of the most legendary metal bands ever. He was a Deep Purple.
Yeah.
Coverdale. And
I think Whitesnake is metal, but I wouldn't say they're like the paradigm. If you put Whitesnake up against Iron Maiden and you say, which of these is the most metal? Iron Maiden, hands down, right? Even if you put them against, like, say, Van Halen or Rat, I would say either of those two bands are more metal than Whitesnake, but Whitesnake is definitely in the boundary,
Yeah. And I think we have to remember how much image had to do with stuff.
Yeah.
And
the confusion that's caused by having long hair. If you had long hair and you were playing something that was kind of hard for a while, you could call it metal. Molly Hatchet tried to get in on that. And I remember being so disappointed when I got one of their albums because people had told me that they're heavy metal and I'm playing it and it's just this Southern rock stuff. And I'm like,
that's right.
What the hell's this stuff? But they dressed the part. They were like jumping on the bandwagon. Mark says there's weird intersections between politics and metal subgenres. The different positions, thrash metal versus black metal culture, hold to Nazism. Yeah, contemporary. Well, not just contemporary, going all the way back into the 90s stuff. Metal positions itself as counterculture, but it's interesting and often disappointing to see it associated with vicious and reactionary political views. That does happen. And I think that's mostly a product of the what we nowadays label technically as the extreme genres. You find that more in there. I mean, I don't think you're going to find that too much of that in traditional, the new wave of traditional heavy metal or in power metal. It's more in other subgenres.
Well, that's interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just want to say, the politics. Now,
Yeah.
any genre, if an artist is going like doing a political record, I don't want to hear it. That's like if it's a metal album. Like I remember, so like when you're at that, what's that?
Then again, War Pigs,
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, yeah.
Iron Maiden gets pretty political too, but it's more progressive politics. Think about like concerns about the environment or about possibility of nuclear war and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, a lot of fans got pissed off at Iron Maiden when they'd start talking about stuff on stage during concerts.
Yeah, and that bothers me on either side. Like when the singer starts ranting about something, especially a sensitive subject.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, wow, you're really isolating. Especially when you're isolating half of your audience.
Yeah.
That don't agree with you.
And that's a really important point. The metal. So it's interesting. Again, I'm going back to Weinstein. She considers the concert to be the preeminent locus for metal. And what is it really about? It's about the connection between the band and the audience. But what Scott's talking about is a split within the audience that can happen through the actions of the band. So if you start saying, you get up on stage and you start, spouting stuff about, Trump or Biden or things like that, and half the audience is like, yeah, screw them, man. And then the other half of the audience is like, well, screw you,
Yeah.
It's producing a very different concert experience. That metal needs a experience of not necessarily unity, but community in order to really work.
And that's Ozfest 10, 11 years ago when I went, I was so disappointed because they had screens set up all over the place and they had like booths set up that were just, it would show George Bush with a Hitler mustache saying same thing. And the whole, like in between, you could buy t-shirts that like, really nasty things about George Bush, or I think that was probably maybe it was longer ago, I'm thinking, but that really turned me off because I'm not there for that reason. I'm not there to, this is our escape. This isn't like we're going to put what's on the news and our take on it in front of you. It was just,
so Mark brings up a really great Megadeth song, one that I've taken a line from and sort of like, put as a post from time to time. If there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better work this time. Peace sells, who's buying?
Yes.
It articulates a political stance, and not just a like party political stance, but a stance about how society ought to work. I'm cool with being progressive and trying something, but it better not get co-opted by the corporations or the power elites or just, human stupidity. It better work this time. I think there's a very powerful political statement there.
That's a really good one. I didn't think of that, the Peace Sells. I remember when that came out, and I remember my friend had just got the record and he came in, he's like, yeah, you hear the new album?
Yeah.
And I said, no. He goes, it's true. Peace sells, but who's buying? And he was like, that's so deep. And I didn't know what he was talking about because I hadn't heard it yet.
Yeah.
But,
I love the first verses, what do you mean all these things? And then he's got a retort to it, what do you mean I don't support this system? I go to court when I have to,
right.
All those sorts of things. Well, let's take this other one by Carl. Then we got to go to our list of songs that we are going to bring up. So Carl says Mark is totally spot on. One of the most interesting things I observed was a couple of years ago, a friend from Iowa came to Chicago to see the original Misfits line up an arena show with Fear, Venom, and some other metal bands on the bill. And he's got the copyright thing because there's two Venoms floating around out there at this point in time, right? There's Venom and Venom Inc. Danzig began spouting some ultra conservative bullshit, and the overwhelming majority of the people cheered him on. And I remember feeling, oh, what the F? I was really only there to accompany my friend, but it was an icky moment, not of the the night, but among all the concerts I've attended. Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon
Carl.
with like seeing the people who we kind of, and we may not necessarily have idolized, but we thought, oh, they're really cool people. And then they spout stuff and you're like, where the hell did this come from? I mean, I think somebody else in another genre that people have been very, very disappointed with for a long time is Morrissey, so
for many reasons.
Yeah. But when he's with the Smiths, and I guess even with some of his early stuff, he's saying things in the songs that would make you think, there's, sensitive, kind of cool guy, kind of dark.
Yeah.
But then, you find out Carl says it comes from people who don't like paying taxes on their money. That's a significant part of it. People do change as they move into a different tax bracket. Well, let's talk about the songs that we picked. I don't know if we're going to get to all like analyzing each of them, but these are the ones that Scott and I hashed around as being meta metal, and they're also anthems. And a lot of them are actually the title tracks too on albums.
Yeah, I see. Yep.
So the first one is Blue Oyster Cult, Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll, very early one, 1972. And we'll look at the lyrics for this a little bit later. Then we jump ahead to Motorhead, Overkill, 1979. You might say, well, that doesn't have metal in the title, but if you look at what the song is articulating, it's about the concert experience. And it's also a great song because it's one of the few that has two false endings, and then goes into a final one, all within 4 minutes, and they managed to pull it off, Then we have Judas Priest, Metal Gods, and we were kicking around Hellbent for Leather before that, and there's other Judas Priest songs that do mention metal, but Metal Gods, I mean, it's got metal right there in the title, and when we look at the lyrics, we'll see why it matters. Iron Maiden, Running Free. Scott and I were like, well, there aren't any Iron Maiden songs that are specifically about metal itself, but this one wound up being kind of an emblematic anthem, not just something that they would play in concert, but something that people would look at and say, yeah, I resonate with what's going on here in this song.
Right.
Saxon, Denim and Leather. This one is very carefully crafted to be about metal identity, as we're going to look at.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll look at that one first because it's so paradigmatic.
Yeah.
Raven's Rock Until You Drop. That's a good one. Venom's Black Metal is actually talking about the metal experience and about concerts, things like that. It also helps to spawn the early beginnings of black metal. This is one that Scott and I didn't talk about, and I as I was looking around, I thought, wait a second, what about Anvil, Metal on Metal? It's a whole album called Metal on Metal.
That's twice. That's
yeah. and in the song, the metal is the band, and the metal is also the audience. So Metal on Metal, it's really about that experience. Except Shake Your Heads really works for this. Twisted Sister, You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. And you notice that sometimes they, instead of talking about metal, it's going to be about rock and roll, but it's, it is that kind of, rock and roll that we call metal. And then we get Quiet Riot's Bang Your Head, Metal Health.
Will drive you mad.
Exactly. Yeah. And then now we're getting into an era where it's becoming much more self-conscious. And, the next band, Metallica, named after metal, Metal Militia, off the very first album. We used to actually, I mean, that was so popular that groups of metalheads would call themselves Metal Militia, or they'd write it on their notebooks or on their jackets.
Yeah, that's right.
Another one that some people might be less familiar with, but I think is actually perfect for this, Manowar's All Men Play on 10. Now, Manowar does have a lot of, this is about metal songs, but this one is perhaps the most metal of all of them.
Yeah.
Anthrax, Metal Thrashing Mad. That fits in there. And then this is one that we debated about quite a bit with Dio. And Scott kind of talked me around to this one because originally I thought like We Rock, or Stand Up and Shout, these two anthems that begin the first two albums, but actually Rock and Roll Children, I think, Scott thought this from the start, but I think this actually fits the best. And that's kind of late. That's 1985.
Yeah, that was on Sacred Heart.
Yeah,
and again, it's kind of like that fills in the identifying with, right? It was starting to rain on the night that they ran away. They're misunderstood. They have nowhere to go, but they've got rock and roll,
Yeah.
So
apparently in the video that I haven't watched, the boy is wavering. He wants to be a metal performer, but he's kind of thinking about, leaving it behind. And she's, more or less saying, come on, man up, you can do it. And, so let's jump into the lyrics for that one.
okay.
The part of the verse, she was meant to be wild, he was nearly a child, but they could only feel each other. They were paper and fire, angel and liar, the devil of one another, right? So there's all of this conflict going on. And then it's rock and roll children alone again, rock and roll children without a friend, but they've got rock and roll.
Right? That's right.
So there's something about this loneliness being shared together, and what allows it to be not just two people sitting in a bar or, off in a car together making out or something like that, is the fact that they have rock and roll. And when they have rock and roll, it's not just any rock and roll that Ronnie James Dio is naming. It's specifically metal,
Yeah. Yeah. And, with the imagery of the starting to rain, that's always like you use that in cinema.
Yeah.
Right? The rainy night kind of thing.
In a way, this is a rare romantic song by Dio, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still, it's a story, but there's no dragons in this, right? So
or rainbows. Yeah, and as we know, even if it's night, there can still be rainbows in the dark for Dio. He can get a rainbow in just about anywhere.
That he can. Somewhere in the night.
Yeah. So there's others. We're going to look at some more lyrics in just a bit, and we're going to look at some of the things that Mark is talking about. But I wanted to mention there's a lot of other metal songs with metal in the title, and so Mark has some here, like Gravedigger's Headbanging Man. Okay, that's referencing an act of metal. Heavy Loads, Heavy Metal Angels in Metal and Leather. That's really taking it to another level. We also have, of course, Accepts Metal Heart, right? Which includes a little bit of classical in it. Twisted Sister has a song called Heavy Metal Christmas. And here we're getting almost to like Spinal Tap parody level stuff. Halloween, Heavy Metal is the Law. That's pretty cool,
That's really cool.
Acid has if you haven't heard Acid, by the way, the Belgian band that managed to produce 3 albums. Essentially, you could call them part of the new wave of British heavy metal, even though they're based in Belgium. They have a song called Hooked on Metal, really good. Lee Aaron had Metal Queen. I think she was kind of capitalizing on it. I don't know. Have you listened to much of Lee Aaron, Scott?
No, but I would say Doro would be the Metal Queen.
Yeah. I kind of think that Lee Aaron was more or less cashing in. She's not, Girl School or Warlock / Doro. She's a bit more AOR. Hard rock. Yeah. And then there's also all sorts of metal name bands. And, we know, of course, about Metallica. There were the Heavy Metal Kids back in the 70s. There are dozens of bands named Metal Militia or Metal Force in the Encyclopedia Metallicum. And then we have bands that are named after things that are pretty metal, like Iron Maiden, right?
Yeah.
Iron, right? Chrome Molly. Arguably Anvil is a metal thing. And I think we could throw Tank in there as well. So,
I mean, that does, when you hear the word, have you ever heard of this band Anvil? And you haven't, you're not going to think that it's like a band that's playing like light, soft rock hits. I mean,
exactly.
It's like they got around. Some of the band names are just kind of like, that's always the hardest part, I think, for people. It's just like, let's just let's just be so ridiculous,
Yeah.
call ourselves
You're,
Anvil.
you're not going to see like a playbill that's like Hall and Oates with special guest Anvil.
Now I'd pay for a ticket to that, especially if they do Sarah Smile together.
Yeah. Okay. So now Carl says Anvil, wasn't that the band that had the great documentary a few
Yes.
years back? Yeah, they did. And they were a band that I guess maybe they were a little bit before their time in a way, because they were doing thrash when it was still called speed. And they never like broke their way into the top four that really came after them. And it might have been wrong place, wrong time. You think about the big four, it's all California or New York, right? And then of course, Europe has its own major thrash scene that develops. So Anvil being a Canadian band, it's kind of tough in some ways. The only thing that Canadian bands really have going for them distribution wise is the requirement that Canadian radio stations play a certain percentage of Canadian music. So
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I think I found that out digging into some stuff about Rush, so that gives you a little bit of an advantage. But going on with like metal stuff, right? So there's metal Blade Records. There were albums with metal or heavy metal in the title. And again, there's dozens of these in Encyclopedia Metallium. Crocus, arguably a metal band, just not a very great one. Metal Rendezvous in 1980. Exciter, another band that never made it out of the second tier. Heavy Metal Maniac. There's another band that's fairly recent called Metal Lucifer, and they have a whole bunch of albums like Heavy Metal Hunter, Heavy Metal Chainsaw, Heavy Metal Bulldozer. So they're clearly, capitalizing on that. And then there's some other songs that people who try to capitalize on it, and it didn't make it. And I think the biggest offender, and maybe somebody else might want to weigh in on this, is Sammy Hagar. He wrote a song called Heavy Metal, and it was in the film Heavy Metal, which was not very metal at all. It was much more psychedelic and soft rocky. And he's got lyrics that could have been good. Headbangers and leather, sparks fly off in the dead of night. It all comes together when they shoot out the lights. 50,000 watts of power. It's pushing overload. The beast is ready to devour all the metal they can hold, and then it's your one-way ticket to midnight. Call it heavy metal. If a different band had done that, that could have been a really great metal song. With Sammy Hagar doing it, it's not bad, but I don't think it's really metal. I mean, what do you think, Scott? Does it qualify? I mean, it's got metal all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wonder if he was approached. I mean, a lot of the soundtracks, especially in the 80s, they would say, okay, well, like take the Rocky movies, for example. They would say to the band, well, this is the content, or like Peter Cetera with "I'll Fight for Your Honor" to bring that line of the movie out. So I think they probably said to Sammy Hagar, "Do you want to cut on this? And you have to write it about metal." I'm surprised that he didn't turn it down. It might have been a lot of money, but
and getting to be part of a cool project, the movie, right?
Right. Yeah, but I agree. I would never. I find Sammy Hagar a great rock and roll artist.
Montrose, I would say, is heavy metal, but Montrose is with Ronnie Montrose.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's funny about that, though. I do agree. Sammy's. I wouldn't call him the offender. I would definitely think whoever produced the album or the music for that movie, I mean, he probably just took the job and did his job.
Let me actually raise the stakes a little bit, asking what's bound to be a rather controversial question. So, David Lee Roth leaves / gets kicked out of Van Halen. And 1984, some of the songs on it, I wouldn't say Jump is a metal song. But House of Pain definitely is. And, there's others on there that I would say are. Sammy Hagar joins Van Halen, and he's bringing something to the band. He's a decent vocalist. He's actually one that they wanted originally before they had Roth. And he's bringing another guitar to the mix, which should always be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Is the stuff that comes after he joins, so like I think it's 5150 onward, is that really just no longer metal in the way that we can say that, like, even Metallica at a certain point, I guess what they're still, the Black Album, is it still metal or is it more poppy? I think some bands kind of move to a point where we can say, I'm not sure this is really metal anymore. So is Sammy Hagar joining Van Halen? Does he turn it from it was really clear core metal originally, it takes it in a more AOR pop direction? What do you think?
Well, that's I've thought about that too. I remember when 5150 came out and we hadn't heard anything about it. So
yeah,
I remember
that's true.
I remember
that's back in the day when you could do that, right?
Right. And so I bought the tape. My friends and I all like piled like around everywhere. And could this be love? Is that why can't this be love?
Oh, right. That's
right.
right.
And it has that. It was that using the synth thing, and there wasn't really a guitar solo in it. It was kind of like that, and we were like, what the hell's this? But then like Summer Nights. Hot Summer Nights on my radio. It's like that, we all wanted to learn Eddie's parts on it because they were great guitar playing, but it was like one of those, whoa, this is not what I was expecting, and then OU812 came out after that. And it was definitely songs about, how do you know when it's love? And David Lee Roth was just a character.
Yeah.
And he didn't, part of the allure was, he didn't care. He was a great front person. He seemed oblivious to anything. Nothing bothered him. And the lyric content changed.
I got to say though, I don't think that Roth ever put out anything so good on his own as he did with Van Halen. No. It's as if he needed that, and he could have other backing bands, but he needed that band to be a part of. They weren't a backing band. They were, they were central to it.
I agree.
So Carl, going back to the Canadian thing, says Glass Tiger, Rush, and Triumph get huge upplay up there because of that law. My wife and I honeymooned in Quebec City. A year later, the band that had the #1 hit was Les Trois Accords, still sitting on the top of the charts largely because stations were still playing the hell out of it. And I mean, if it leads to Triumph getting more plays, I'm cool with it. I think they're really underrated.
I do too. I think they're amazing.
Some people would say that they're light metal, but I don't think. I think they're kind of like right in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, some songs. Some songs are lighter than others, but it definitely has that drive of metal. Yeah. And the heavy guitars.
You could call their stuff optimistic metal.
Optimistic. That's good. I like that.
You can do it. You can fight the good fights. You've got the magic power in you.
That's right. The magic, exactly. But their songs are just, they could write. I mean, they definitely made it because the songs were so great.
I'm kind of a softie sometimes when it comes to music stuff, and I'm not exactly sure why, but some of Triumph's stuff can actually make me teary listening to it.
Yes, there's somebody's out there somewhere waiting for someone.
Yeah, really great songwriting.
It's just, I agree. And I used to joke, what's with Canada and trios with people singing super high range,
Yeah.
Them and Rush.
Maybe there's a school for it somewhere that we don't know about.
I know.
Or a little lab where they grow them,
I'd be curious to know if they were ever on a bill together.
Triumph and Rush. They must have been, I imagine, at some point in time.
I'm going to look that up later.
Mark points out the guy from Razor too. Now, if people don't know Razor, they are a sort of underrated gem. Another one of we should have to do a show on this sometime, like why things didn't come together for certain bands that deserve more airplay and listening to. I mentioned Acid, great band. Hardly anybody knows about them. Razors is like that, even Diamond Head would have been like that if Metallica hadn't covered Am I Evil. People wouldn't have been going back to them and listening to them.
Isn't that the story you told me where they got booed for playing?
I think they opened for Metallica.
Right.
And they played Am I Evil, and the fans, because a lot of the fans are essentially musically illiterate, started booing them and saying, "You're ripping Metallica off," And then the Metallica guys had to come out on stage and say, no. Our song is a cover of Diamond Head's song. They did it originally, so sit down and shut the hell up.
So they really did come out and stick up for the band.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, they were there because the Metallica guys. You can say a lot of bad stuff about Metallica after the Cliff Burton era, but one thing you can say is they really did support a lot of fairly obscure classic metal bands that might have given them, the ballast that they needed to stay afloat. I mean, Diamond Head's Brian Tadler says that Am I Evil has made them more money than any other thing, and it's what allowed the band to continue on. And I think we could say that for like Blitzkrieg, and maybe Budgie. I mean, Budgie had a career of their own, but Metallica covering Bread Fan definitely gave them a boost.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we talked about Maiden taking lesser known bands on the road, like Pete Way's band, because Pete Way was his biggest influence, and how
on Steve Harris,
and how angry he got when the crowd booed them and told him to get off stage.
Yeah,
and he also says people boo because he loves Journey. Steve Harris does. So he said the PA music's a lot of times Journey.
Yeah,
and he says the crowd boos it.
Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's do some of the song lyric analysis. So do you want to lead off? Because Blue Oyster Cult, I like them, but you love them.
So. Oh yeah. So Cities on Flame. Yeah, my heart is black and my lips are cold. Cities on flame with rock and roll. 3,000 guitars, they seem to cry. My ears will melt and then my eyes. So right off the bat, this is just, it's, yeah, it's like I said, it's like hyperbolic. It's like, your ears melting, like 3,000 guitars. This is all so over the top. And then let that girl rock and roll. Cities on flame with rock and roll. Yeah, forbidden delights, reigns of steel, and it's all right. Cities on flame. With rock.
I like this line. Marshall will buoy, but Fender control. Right, it's referring to the technology that's being used.
If you read a lot of Blue Oyster Cult lyrics, you'll need references. They were big sci-fi fans. They're big. Eric Bloom said he was a big reader, and sometimes I didn't know what they were talking about, like astronomy.
Yeah,
but it's well written. But yeah, that's kind of, when I used to listen to the albums, I was like, what are they saying here? I would have never got that line without the lyrics.
Yeah. And, if you think about it, so you're being invited to participate in the 3,000 guitars, right? As an audience member, and part of heavy metal, its gestures and stuff is playing air guitar. So I think this is an early example of a MetaMetal song before heavy metal is really being classified as heavy metal.
Yeah, this was an early one. This song's this one's on the first album.
Yeah.
And they still play it. And the crowd goes berserk when they play it. It's
I got to see them play it here before COVID at the Potawatomi Northern Sun. It's been so long since I've been there, and it was really cool to see it getting played live.
Oh yeah, it's great. And that, the whole instrumental part at the end, it's
and everybody in the, going to a Blue Oyster Cult show. I don't know if it's like this way over by you, but everybody knows the lyrics to these standards,
Yeah. So they can pull out anything and we'll know the lyrics. you know, the Blue Oyster Cult could probably, this goes to one of our older conversations, they could probably play bigger venues if they only played, well, they didn't have a lot of radio hits, but they only played the radio hits and then did the cover thing we talked about, and
oh, right,
and handed cowbells out to everybody, you know.
Yeah, with a little Blue Oyster Cult symbol on it. That would be kind of a funny gimmick to do. But yeah, they play the stuff. They support their new works.
Yeah, this tour they're playing 5 from their new album, which I kept telling Richie, who's the second guitarist. I would text him and I'd say, you better not ignore this album on the road because it's a great one. And so I said, you have to play at least 5. So the night I saw them, they played 3 of them, and I go, got 2 more to go. And finally he sent me a message 2 weeks ago and he said, all right, here's the songs we did live. We made it to 5 from the album. I go, good, you're gonna sell more.
Yeah.
Because the fans will buy the vinyl and the t-shirt for the tour, and the kick drum had the new album cover on it. That made me really happy that they're like, you know, they've got a big catalog, but they're not just resting on that. It's like, hey, we've got new stuff. It's 2021. Yeah. And here we go. And we're proud of it.
Totally off topic. And I don't want to consume too much of our time with this, but one of the things that we ought to do on the show is reviews of recent classic metal bands albums from like, say 2018 onward, because like Raven's got a new album, like you put it up, Blue Oyster Cult does, Judas Priest has Firepower, Saxon has a fairly new album. I think it would be smart for us to like,
that's great,
listen to them and talk about it, and also invite people from the audience to listen to them. You know, we can announce it in advance. Yeah, but let's jump back to so Motorhead's Overkill, I mentioned, is about the experience of being at a metal concert. And he says, only way to feel the noise is when it's good and loud. So good you can't believe it's screaming with the crowd. Don't sweat it, get it back to you. Right. That's the preceding the chorus, and then Overkill is the chorus itself. On your feet, you feel the beat, it goes straight to your spine. Shake your head, you must be dead if it don't make you fly. So it's talking about the kinesthetic aspect of it, right? Know your body's made to move, feel it in your guts. Rock and roll ain't worth a name if it don't make you strut, right? So and that's it. That, I mean, other than saying don't sweat it, get it back to you, and then Overkill, that's the whole song. And then, you know, Fast Eddie Clark playing his solos and the fake endings, and then starting up again.
Yeah.
I think that's you know, this is a MetaMetal song essentially. What's another one that you want to focus on? We talked about Rock and Roll Children and Blue Oyster Cult, which were our bookends. What's one that you think is the most important from the
well, we were going to go to Denim and Leather. I think we should definitely
let's talk about that one. Yeah,
because I think you're right about that.
So this one, I mean, it's pretty clearly crafted to talk about the experience at great length. And I'm going to jump to, there's all these things where he's sort of challenging the audience. There's one verse where it says, do you dream of playing guitar or smashing up the drums? Maybe you can learn to play the bass. And right after he says that, maybe you can learn to play the bass, there's a bass fill, right? Or you can be a singer like me and front the band. When on the stage, we wait at your command. So this is, you know, Biff Byford talking directly to the audience at the concert, on the record, you know, and he's saying, you can do this too, man. You can be part of the experience. But there's so much else in this song. What struck you in particular?
Well, it's, you know, after all, you know, the lyrics you're talking about, the chorus, Denim and Leather brought us all together. Yeah. So here we have this, you know, everything here is about, we're in this together. You're not alone. You know, this is the whole, it's not just the concert or the record. It's the whole thing's an experience. And
Denim and Leather really were the emblematic, like, early metal stuff. You either had a denim jacket or a leather jacket, or maybe if it was cold, you wore your leather jacket over your denim jacket. You know, I mean, what else did people have? There was spandex for the band, but most
or leather pants. A lot of them were wearing leather pants.
That's true. which must have been ungodly hot up in front of lights.
And that's the title track of the album, which is kind of cool. So, you know, that says something. I don't think they just said, just call it one of the songs and we trust you on that. I mean, it's were you in 79 when the dam began to burst? I love that. So it's kind of like, you know, you were there, but you know about it, but where were you? Did you check us out down at the local show? And we were wearing denim, wearing leather. Yeah. So it's totally identifiable.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's inaugural in a certain way. Like you and me, we were too young to be at a metal show in 79, unless, you know, maybe if we had like an older uncle who was into it, who could have taken us. But I mean, 79, I would have been 9 years old. Right. So I doubt they would have let me in, even if I was on somebody's shoulders, but we can imagine ourselves being there at that time and participating in it, you know?
Exactly. Right. Yeah, that's a pretty solid metal. I wouldn't call it an anthem. I would say it goes along with creating the community, and you know, you're like us, and you know, this is going to reach out to those people that are, you know, for many reasons, but either they're already in it and these guys know what they're talking about, or you hear the lyrics and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I want to be part of something. I think that's a big thing in a lot of these. They're not metal lyrics. If we look at all this stuff, they're not going to be subtle about rock and roll metal. They're going to be subtle about sex. They're not going to be subtle about
that's right.
Drinking. You know, they're definitely not showing and you know, to the earlier question, they're definitely the different genres might talk about drinking, but not excessive drinking.
Yeah.
Or a one-off, or you know, or dating, or you know, it's pretty in your face, almost fantasy stuff. Even the love songs.
There can be like multiple levels, and so you can talk about there being nuance, right? But you're right. There's no subtlety.
Right. I mean,
we can draw a distinction between the two of those things. One of the things I really like about this song is how it ends. It was you that set the spirit free. It was you that put us here today. It was you that filled the concert halls. It was you, right? So it's in a way, it's a song expressing kind of gratitude or acknowledgement of the fan base, you know? Brilliant.
I know, it's great. And you know, Dio always said that in interviews.
Right. Yeah, he's a very gracious guy.
And he said he learned that. He said he did one show and a bunch of kids I forget what country they're in. It was raining and it was freezing. And a bunch of kids, like about 300 kids, waited outside and they missed their train home. So to get Richie's signature, and he walked right past them into a car.
Oh.
And Dio said at that moment, my band, I said to my band, you sign, you come out, and you always go out. And so he made, what Dio ended up doing was, he said he played that same venue years later, and there was, you know, maybe 1,000 people there waiting. It was freezing. So he invited everybody inside, and he said, we set up a table and we signed till 6 in the morning. So, you know, that's kind of,
that's a commitment, you know. And it's not just a commitment to a lifestyle, it's a commitment to a community.
Exactly. And that's what the song is saying, because he says exactly this. He goes, you know, we're nobody without these people. You know, if these people don't buy a ticket, then we might as well be in the basement. And so I thought that was really, you know, he said that's what I think we talked about what he learn not to do from Richie Blackmore.
So Mark has a good comment here. There's a tension in some of these songs, emphasis on metal fraternity, but also an exclusivity and often sharp divide between the true believers and the posers. Manowar has some cringy songs like that. Yeah, and that's right. I think some of Manowar's songs are cringy. You know, they didn't date well, you could say. So let's jump to one of them that actually is not bad. It actually is pretty good. All Men Play on 10. Now, of course, you can say this kind of sexist, right?
Right.
Because what about women? Can they play on 10? So, but it has kind of a nice narrative to it. So it reads, I made a rock and roll sin when I tried giving in to make money, had to turn down loud. They said, why be proud? Don't play so loud. Be like us and get a song that's real thin. Wear a polyester suit, act happy, look cute, get a haircut and buy small gear. That's when I turned to them and said, hold it right there. Then he says, so here's the chorus. Well, it's more to me than just a job. And while I'm playing, you won't get robbed. Nobody tells a man how to play. It just ain't that way. And then he says, can you hear me say, all men play on 10, never going to turn down again. That's like the chorus. And some of that is, Manowar is always very over the top, right? I mean,
big time.
In a way you could say Manowar, they're not a parody band, right? So they're not Spinal Tap, they're not Cauldron, but they're paradotic, or to use another word that Scott used earlier, they're hyperbolic, and they're hyperbolic in a way that, as Mark's pointing out, is kind of cringy, so right. It's hard to draw the line between doing that well. But I do like that notion of all men play on 10, that he's got some other stuff, but you could easily look up the lyrics to see that. Which other ones, because we only have a little bit of time before we have to get off. Which other ones do you want to talk about in particular, Scott?
Well, I mean, the Quiet Riot one, Quiet Riot was one of those, they were so deliberate in their lyrics, it wasn't even clever. I mean, it's just, when did that album come out? I was in 6th or 7th grade.
That was 83.
83.
Yeah.
We're not going to take it. And then the videos, of course, the time of the 80s was being rebellious against the parents that wanted to take our rock and roll from us. And of course, with all those hearings, trying to put a warning sticker.
The led by Tipper Gore. PMRC. Is that
PMRC, right? But got a mouth like an alligator. I want it louder, more power.
Yeah.
I'm gonna rock till it strikes the hour. And it's like another thing that we missed. They talk about volume. Metal songs always talk about volume.
That's true. Yeah. Volume or intensity, you could say, right?
Well, Spinal Tap picked up on that because they had that song "Heavy Duty." I want to just make some I just want to make some eardrums bleed.
And they had amps that went to 11.
They did.
So
yeah, they did. And
that could be their response to Manowar. You play on 10, but we play on 11.
Yeah, that's such a great scene. He's like, Rob Reiner goes, well, why don't you just have everything on 9 and make 10 the loudest? And then Nigel's completely stumped, like he never thought about that. And he's like, well, these go to 11. Yes. But, they picked up on the, it has to be loud, and that I remember playing guitar in my basement, and one of my friends came over and he came downstairs and he just shook his head. He goes, turn it up. What are you doing? I was probably playing like a Maiden song or something. And that was kind of the thing. It was cool to be loud. When I
had a bass that I had a 25 watt practice amp that had a 12-inch speaker. Yeah. And then I had a 200 watt power amp head that I put through a 15-inch speaker. And I'd play with both of them and like run a distortion pedal into the smaller amp and then just overdrive the other one. And I would play in our basement in Waukesha, and I'd only jack it up like when nobody was home, but I don't think I ever went beyond 8 on that amp because it was so ungodly loud with 200 watts and a 15-inch speaker, and everything in the basement was like shaking, So,
oh God, yeah, exactly, yeah. And that was I did this, I just had like one of those PV amps, and it was plenty loud. But I didn't really, some kids had the Marshalls in their basement, but I didn't consider it. That the volume thing, that wasn't when I played in high school or college. That didn't occur to me, the volume thing. But yet I was listening to music that talked about it constantly.
Yeah. Well, as we're heading out, let me just bring up one of them, except Shake Your Heads. Now, it's not, it's referencing head banging, but it's not saying, bang your head, right?
Right.
It's shake your heads till your necks are breaking. The only way that that's going to happen is if you're head banging, right? Shake your heads, cry out as loud as you can. And why should you do that? Well, the lyrics say, see the world around you, deep, dark, and gray. Grieving heartbreaks all your life seems to be the way. Wars of aggression, mankind's favorite game. A press on the button, a world in flames. Every day and night, and every night and every day, frustrations in your heart like a one-way ticket. No return, you're tore apart. And then it's shake your heads till your necks are breaking. That's supposed to be your response to a world that has gone insane. And, Accept is writing this in 1982, I think. Height of the Cold War, they're writing it from Germany, which is right in between, the Warsaw Pact. When I was, in the Army, we expected the Warsaw Pact forces could come across the border anytime into Germany. So, living there, that would be, kind of a significant thing. This is sort of like, you could say a response to war pigs, right? Except now it's telling you to do something that's metal, to shake your heads. That's the response to all this bullshit that you're dealing with,
And yeah, exactly. And to take it so far that you break your neck.
Yeah. Which, some of the concerts that we went to in the 80s, I remember coming back from them in the car and your neck was just like limp noodle from headbanging so much. So, well, what else should we say before we end? I know, Scott, you've got to go and I've got to get to grading. Unfortunately, I can't wait to get that very unmetal thing past me.
That's very. No, this is a topic Greg came up with a few weeks ago, and I thought it was fantastic. And the more we got into it, the more questions came up, and we started with just saying, okay, songs about metal, but then we went through all this and like, okay, well, who's saying it and what's unique to it, and did it create, and like you answered this, I agree, it created people kind of being together, but it also drew in the people that were already like that wanted to be included in something.
It allowed not generations, but people of different ages to interact with each other and to influence each other.
And it was the times. I'd be curious to see what newer bands are singing about, like newer metal bands. I don't know a lot of the newer bands.
It's harder to reference an entire community than it was in the 70s and 80s because it's been split into so many sub-communities, and it's hard to bring everybody together in the same place as well, So
yeah, well, this is an era that
plus you got all us old people listening to metal and talking about it, right? So it's not a youth subculture anymore.
No, but although we can reflect on the lyrics now, where at the time we might have been kind of part of the lyrics, like, yeah, dude, like, let's party, man. Let's go get girls. Let's,
well, but now it's 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
I got to go take my medicine.
I know now it's, you know what? This shows that the music is that good.
Yeah.
Because,
it's outliving us.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the music is amazing. We didn't talk about that. We talked about the lyrics, but the lyrics maybe we would relate to at age 16, 17, 18. But I'm not relating to it now. But I was part of the era when I was relating to it.
Yeah.
But that's it. Yeah, I think I liked this one.
Yeah, me too. I think it turned out quite well. Thanks to everybody for joining us and the great comments and questions. Particularly from some of our regulars. So
yeah,
we're going to end it here and we'll see you in the new year for the next stuff. I'm not quite sure what we're doing quite yet, but Scott and I will work that out ahead of time and we'll have some cool stuff lined up.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy holidays, everyone.